Our journey starts at the Metropole Hotel in Hanoi in December 2012. It was much cooler than we expected, so the Christmas decorations didn't feel too out of place, though in a Buddhist country it is a little odd. The area around the hotel seems very popular for wedding photos, many of which are taken several days before the wedding itself. Tour director Tony took us on the strangely spelt pottery tour. First we had to pass through a street market in the centre of the 500-year-old village of Bat Trang. Apart from the fast food, the main produce on sale was fresh fruit and veg. This included mushrooms, dragon fruit, rambutan and mangosteen, which we sampled. It tasted like a cross between a melon, a lychee and a soft banana. Everything was neatly trimmed, washed, scraped and beautifully displayed. The sight of a three-wheeler truck loaded with clay told us that we got to the first pottery, all of which are run by different families who make different styles of pottery. This one specialized in vases and power line insulators. They're distributed by push-bike with panniers. The next pottery was making wine cups and jugs, but we could only work out what they were doing by watching it in slow motion. A lump of clay is thrown into a spinning cup and shaped by pressing a stick into it. Other components are prepared in molds. Everything is put on racks to dry. All the parts are then stuck together with slip. They're painted at lightning speed before firing. Other potteries do crackle glaze, fancy painting, and even hand throwing.
He makes a flower pot.
One of our party was invited to have a go herself.
Yeah, you put your water, your hand in the water. Yeah, lower part you hold it. Yeah, you come inside.
Then there was plenty of time to look at all the finished products. By the time we got back to the hotel, all the Christmas lights had been turned on. Next morning dawned cool and wet as we headed to the Temple of Literature, Vietnam's first national university. The main entrance leads to a series of courtyards. In one of these is the Well of Heavenly Clarity. There are various pavilions, statues and halls. The temple was built in 1070 and is one of several dedicated to Confucius, sages and scholars. The final building houses statues of Confucius and his disciples. The rain had stopped by the time we got to Ba Dinh Square, site of the mausoleum of Ho Chi Minh. Opposite stands the Presidential Palace, which Uncle Ho never used. President of North Vietnam from 1951 to 1969, he preferred to live at the side of his fishing lake in a small cottage, which is simply furnished. The cottage flooded quite regularly, so a second house was built nearby on stilts. In a nearby souvenir stall we saw this group whose music features throughout the video. Just across the road is the One Pillar Pagoda, an historic Buddhist temple built of wood on a single stone pillar, designed to resemble a lotus blossom. Vietnamese houses are typically narrow and tall, as the price of land is very high. After lunch we were taken on a rickshaw ride through the streets of Old Hanoi, where we passed more wedding photographers. There are about 3.5 million motorbikes in Hanoi, and most of them wanted our bit of road. Zebra crossings are a complete waste of paint. It's said that if a Vietnamese dies and goes to hell, he's sent back to Hanoi to untangle the overhead cables. Impromptu cafes just spring up at the side of the road. Pedestrians walk on oblivious. At the end of the ride, we were all sold photographs of ourselves. Next, we went to the water puppets, where we were greeted with traditional music and a detailed explanation of what we were about to see.
Nhạc sĩ Đặng Hữu Phúc và tập thể dàn nhạc nhà hát múa rối Thăng Long, chỉ đạo nghệ thuật nghệ sĩ ưu tú Hoàng Tuấn.
At the end of the show, the puppeteers came out. It's amazing how many people it takes to put on a show like this. Next morning we set off through the veg farms to Ha Long Bay, where we were taken by tender to Indochina Sales Premium, the beautiful junk where we spent the next 24 hours. As we ate lunch, the sails were hoisted and we went to T-Top Island. Here we went ashore and had an amazing view of some of the thousands of spectacular limestone islets that fill the bay. From here we could see that the sails were purely for show. The views were even better from the top of the island. We went back to the junk to sail on through the islands and past other ships. Until recently all the ships were natural dark wood finish, but the local mayor, having thought how pretty the boats looked on his holiday to Italy, decreed that they must all be painted white before being granted the renewal of their license. Next trip was to the Bat Cave area to visit the largest floating village in the bay. We went on small boats rowed by the locals past the houses and saw how Tesco deliver here. We went back to the junk for dinner and bed. Early next morning, we gathered for Tai Chi on deck. Then we sailed to Surprise Cave, a limestone cave full of stalagmites and stalactites at the top of a long, steep flight of steps. The guides gave suggestions as to what each formation looked like, many needing a lot of imagination. The pointing finger, however, is obvious, isn't it? Meanwhile, those of us who couldn't make the steps stayed on the junk's tender to tour another floating village. Here, in addition to houses, were shops, schools and banks. The men of the village were already out fishing. Other caves led directly from the water's edge. One crew member took advantage of the wait for the cavers to catch up on his sleep. Back at the top, the cavers came out to see what looked like the legs of someone who'd fallen through the ceiling. The Tesco delivery boat was bringing hot breakfasts. A long boardwalk brought those who had visited the cave back to the tender. From here we then flew to Da Nang and on to Hoi An. Next morning we woke at the Palm Garden Resort in Hoi An, which is set in beautiful gardens. Breakfast was served at the side of the swimming pool. We went into town where we were met by a local chef for a tour of the market. Here we were shown the huge variety of ingredients that are available and told how they're used. Then we walked down to the quay to board a small riverboat. Hoi An has a river system covering hundreds of kilometres, which has been used for transport for centuries. Nowadays, beautiful homes and hotels line the riverbanks. Our destination was the Red Bridge Cookery School. First we sat down to study the recipe cards. Then Chef Tan showed us how to make rice paper and spring rolls, a mirror making it easier to see. After a quick photo at our cooking stations, it was our turn to try it for ourselves. They turned out surprisingly well. Next came a Hoi An pancake, and Tan couldn't resist showing off.
And the herb. Mint, basil, coriander.
Throughout the course, they made sure that hygiene standards were kept high. After eating the fruits of our labours, we set off on another rickshaw ride, this time past rice paddies. 80% of the country's population are rice farmers, and Vietnam is the world's largest exporter of rice. Our destination was a small workshop where traditional lanterns are made. The top and bottom sections are done by machine, then bamboo strips are added by hand. Fabric is glued to the bamboo to make the finished lantern. There were a large number on display. Then it was our turn. The glue got everywhere, the material frayed, and the scissors wouldn't cut. And we needed help with the trim. One of the staff made and attached a tassel. Somehow they look pretty good lit up. Next day we went to the lift up Marble Mountain, from which there are wide panoramic views of the surrounding area. Near the lift is a Buddhist pagoda. Mosaic dragons decorate the walls of the shrines. offers a garden with statues and stupas of Buddhist monks. Behind the shrine are several caves, many of which have been made into Hindu sanctuaries, with statues carved out of the living marble. On the way out, we passed this beautiful pagoda, and then went back down the lift to visit a marble carving workshop. Here you can buy statues of all sizes, which can be shipped all over the world. Every garden should have a laughing cow. I don't know what this guy's on, but he's definitely away with the fairies. Driving on, we passed an enormous roadside Buddha, and then went over the hills and past the lakes to the city of Hue for the next 2 nights. The highlight of Hue is its citadel, surrounded by a moat and 4 walls, each of which is 2 kilometers long. Within the walls was the Imperial City, similar to the Forbidden City in Beijing. Building was started in 1804. A second set of walls and another moat were added around the Emperor's palace. More palaces, gates, courtyards and gardens were added later. There were dozens of buildings and hundreds of rooms, but many were lost due to termite damage. Those that remain are currently being renovated. The citadel was badly damaged during the war with America, and out of 160 buildings, only 10 remain. The rule of the last Vietnamese emperor ended in the mid-1990s, and his palace and that of his mother, surrounded by beautiful gardens, still remain. It became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1993. At one gate of the inner wall is a drum tower, and at the other a bell tower. Not far away is the Tien Mu Pagoda, the tallest in Vietnam. It stands at the edge of a Buddhist monastery, which has a large courtyard containing statues and bonsai trees. Across the road a dragon boat waited to take us down the Perfume River, named after the blossoms which fell into the water further upstream. It took us back to our hotel, La Résidence, where we relaxed by the pool before going to dress for an emperor's feast, where even the prawns had to dress up. As we left Hue, we went to the tomb of the Emperor Tu Duc, who ruled Vietnam between 1847 and 1883, about 5 miles from the city centre. The complex was designed by Tu Duc himself and consists of lakes, gardens, courtyards and statues. The stele records his life, but doesn't mark his final resting place, which is unknown. He liked this peaceful complex so much that he moved in early, setting up a summer home in this palace within the complex. That evening we flew to Ho Chi Minh City. 50 miles from the city are the Cu Chi tunnels, built by resistance fighters during the war. In the dense forest, which was heavily bombed by the Americans, are the hidden entrances to this incredible network of tiny tunnels, which were used by Viet Cong guerrillas as hiding places, communication and supply routes, hospitals, weapon caches, and living quarters for hundreds of guerrilla fighters. Pits filled with vicious spikes were covered with hidden trapdoors to catch the unwary. Ventilation shafts were disguised as termite mounds. Examples of various traps, some of which were hidden within the tunnels themselves, are on display. These were designed as much for psychological as physical injury. Then we got the opportunity to visit one of the actual tunnels. There was a little light at the entrance, but then it got very dark and claustrophobic, although these had been widened for tourists. It was a great relief to get out. We had lunch at a pretty riverside restaurant. Then we went through the rubber plantations back to the city. Here I dashed out to take photographs of some of the French colonial buildings. Although the official name is Ho Chi Minh City, the locals still know the downtown area as Saigon. Keelong Art Village is on an island in the middle of the Saigon River. All the houses in the village are owned by artists. The first part of our visit was to the gallery, where painting styles and techniques were explained. Then we walked around the gardens, where the houses are styled and laid out as a traditional Vietnamese village. The river alongside carries ocean shipping into the centre of the city. Next we went to the workshop and watched artists using eggshells and lacquer to produce their distinctive works. Finally, the leader of the group, artist Lee Cat Nu, did a traditional Chinese painting of bamboo, which was later raffled. We then set off across the paddy fields to the Mekong River, where we joined our home for the next week, the AmaLotus river cruiser. We immediately set sail upstream, relaxing on the open deck. At the stern was a refreshing plunge pool, and behind we towed the tenders that would be used for shore excursions. At 8:30 in the morning, before it got too hot, we set off for the town of Kai Bi by tender. First we went to the floating market. Here boats from the agricultural areas bring supplies in bulk, which they sell to retail traders. All the transactions take place between the boats, leading to a very busy, bustling waterway. Maybe the load isn't well balanced on this tender. We went ashore to see a snack food factory. First we saw rice paper, similar to what we'd made at the cookery school. Then a still for whiskey, which we all sampled. Then I tried the snake whiskey. I hope this one wasn't going to end up in the whiskey jar. They make popped rice by throwing it into blazing hot sand and stirring. The rice is separated from the sand by shaking it through a mesh screen.
And the second time they
Next, it's mixed with palm sugar and set in large molds before being cut up and sold to school children. Here they also make coconut candy, which is very tasty.
The coconut candy that already made. Okay.
A resident artist paints pictures which are for sale in the shop, along with other souvenirs. We walked down the back street past the jackfruit tree until we came to the cathedral. Then we went back to the boat. Although we'd only been out for 2 hours, we were so hot and sticky that we headed straight for the shower as we sailed along towards Vinh Long. Again we went ashore by tender, past the local ferry. All but the crew had to wear life jackets on tender trips. Once ashore, we went straight to the market. This was purely a local market, selling fish, fruit, veg, and live meat. These are all varieties of dried fish and prawns, and next door were mushrooms. Everything was of superb quality, though it clearly bored one of the stallholders, or she'd had a long day, but her colleague was animated enough. As usual, the place was full of motorbikes. These are the normal transport for the whole family. Passing the dragon fruit, we headed for the dreaded durian, said to be the tastiest but smelliest fruit on the planet. After tasting it, we're not convinced of either. Some of the stalls are tiny, and others don't look terribly hygienic. But live snakes really are the limit. You could get live poultry of any age.
Duck as well. Today they don't have baby duck.
At the river edge, the tender was waiting to take us back to the AmaLotus. Having moved on to Sardek, the tender took us past riverside houses to a traditional brickworks for a guided tour. Since schools are mornings or afternoons only, the workers' children come to the workplace and play around the factories. Large slabs of clay are fed through a forming machine and cut to size. Bricks and tiles are fired in bottle kilns built of brick. They're fired using rice husk. In another part of the works, tiles were being put through a trimming machine, which also sprayed them with oil. Then they were taken out to dry in the hot sunshine, in their hundreds. We then went back to the tender and moved on to another market. This one specialised in fresh fish. Very fresh fish. And rat meat. Further down the street we came to more stalls which were selling sugarcane. You could also buy fishing nets and 24 different varieties of rice. At the crossroads is the Hoi An temple. Initially built in the 1920s and paid for by Chinese immigrants from the Hoi An region, it's been extended and developed thanks to donations from many Chinese families. We returned once more to the tenders to rejoin our ship, which spent the afternoon cruising upstream whilst we relaxed on deck. Next morning the tender took us on a very short trip into the town of Tan Chau. Here we boarded a different type of rickshaw, with us sitting behind the rider. We were taken along the riverside promenade to a silk weaving factory. After a demonstration on a display loom, we were taken into the main factory. The electrically driven looms use punch cards, which define the pattern in a system developed in 1801. Known as jacquard looms, they're the world's first digitally controlled machines. We could buy the beautiful materials in the shop. Back on the rickshaws in the busy streets, all the children waved to us. Next stop was at a reed mat making workshop. These clever machines grab a reed and pull it through the warp. Goodness knows how the operator keeps track of the colour order. Out at the back of the workshop is a small village. The houses are built on stilts as the river floods its banks every year. We wandered through fields and farms as the daily life of a farmer was described to us. This former paddy, whose soil had become exhausted, had had the clay removed from under the soil to use in the brickworks, and now serves as a fish farm. Across the fields, the tender was waiting to take us to a floating fish farm. The entire area under the floating house was caged off, and young fish were brought on until ready for market. We continued along a tributary, passing the boats which had taken the produce to Kaibi market. Other boats served as people's homes. Children here learn to swim before they can walk. Fishermen mended their nets, and little ferries carried pedestrians and motorbikes across the river. The tender dropped us off again, this time on an agricultural island. Every rainy season, the entire island is submerged under several meters of water. When the waters recede, the land is covered with a fresh layer of fertile silt. As a result, they can grow almost anything. We carried on through the village, meeting the locals, to where the tender was waiting for us. Then quickly back to the ship to get to the Cambodian border post. Whilst we were waiting to clear customs, the chefs gave a cooking demonstration. I had another opportunity to perfect my spring roll making technique. Another chef demonstrated the art of fruit carving. There was also an opportunity to visit the bridge and photograph the captain. During the evening, we sailed to Phnom Penh, capital of Cambodia, where we moored alongside a sister ship. Signs directed us to the shore gangway. Other cruisers were moored behind us. We went first to the Genocide Museum, a former high school which became security prison S21 under Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge regime between 1975 and 1979. prisoners, whose main offence seemed to be that they were educated, were brought here and first of all had their photographs taken. There were men, women and children. Once fully documented, they were locked in individual cells just 6 feet long and 2 feet wide. They were chained to the floor and had an old ammunition box for a toilet. Larger rooms were used for interrogation and torture.
So in some other rooms, you will see bloodstained volunteers, and even in the photo, also more bloodstained in the first.
Barbed wire netting was strung along balconies to prevent prisoners committing suicide. Very few survived, and this gentleman is one of only 2 or 3 still alive today. Once a prisoner had confessed, and by the end of the torture they would confess to anything, and implicated their family and neighbours, they were brought here to the killing fields. Deep trenches were dug in the fields, the prisoners made to kneel beside them, and then they were hit on the back of the head with a stick or an iron bar, and they fell into the trench. The lucky ones were killed by the blow. Some political prisoners were beheaded. During the rainy season, bones and bits of clothing are still washed out from the mud, and are placed in this box. Entire families were killed, little babies being held by their feet, and their heads swung into this tree. This happened all over the country, and in total 1/4 of the entire population were killed, and this is their memorial. The mood lightened after lunch when we went to the Royal Palace, which was built in 1866 as the home of the Cambodian king. Photographs are not permitted inside the buildings, but there's plenty to see on the outside, including stupas, which mark the final resting place of the kings. In the heart of the complex stands the Silver Pagoda, named after its 5,000 solid silver floor tiles. There was plenty of time to wander around the beautiful courtyards and gardens, and admire the shrines and stupas. From here we went to the central market. It was divided into several sections, including souvenirs galore and thousands of t-shirts. There was also a flower market. Here we got our first sighting of a Cambodian tuk-tuk, so different from the ones we've seen in India and Thailand. That evening we had a demonstration of traditional Cambodian dance by local Khmer children. Then came the bamboo dance, after which some members of the party were invited to have a go. Early in the morning we sailed out of Phnom Penh. After breakfast we arrived at the tiny village of Chong Ko, where the welcoming party was waiting in the elephant grass. We disembarked, then crossed the road and walked past the local Buddhist temple to the school. We went to visit one of the classrooms, and once the children had calmed down, they recited the Khmer alphabet for us. We then walked through the fields beneath trees which had nets slung under them to prevent injury from falling nuts. Again, all the houses were built on stilts. In the gardens were banana trees, and large pots held drinking water and goldfish, which kept it fresh by eating mosquito larvae. Underneath the houses were silk workshops. The spinning wheel was a converted bicycle. The walk was prepared on this wooden frame, and the fabric was woven both by hand and by foot. There was, of course, an opportunity to buy. The kitchen was in the back garden, and the upstairs was mainly for sleeping, with mattresses bought second-hand from hotels. We went to look at the street sellers' wares before moving on to Udon, which was capital of Cambodia from 1618 to 1865. Here we visited Vipassana, the biggest Buddhist monastery in Cambodia. It's a new, large temple which serves as a Buddhist study centre. We were invited to take part in a blessing ceremony chanted by Buddhist monks. We then spent half an hour wandering round the beautiful, peaceful garden with its snake ornamentation, statues, golden lions and temples. In one part of the garden is an ornamental lake. Then we got back on the bus and drove past scores of people heading home from work on all sorts of transport. We arrived in a village in Kampong Tralak for our next mode of transport. Having distributed pens to the local kids, we then boarded ox carts, each of which had an attendant child who entertained us as we drove down the dusty road.
It's a happy and you know it's like a free. It's a happy and you know it's like a free. It's a happy and you really want to show. It's a happy and you know it's like a free.
We went past rice paddies. Then it was our turn to entertain the children. We piled back on board and enjoyed a beautiful sunset as we continued upstream. We diverted onto the Tonle River and arrived just off Kampong Chhnang. We boarded local boats and headed towards town. The river must flood to a huge extent here, because just look at the length of the stilts under these houses. In fact, many people here have floating houses so that the flooding won't affect them. Most of the people on the floating houses are Vietnamese, having come over to help defeat Pol Pot. When the armies were recalled to Vietnam, they sent their uniforms and guns back, but stayed themselves. We took a stroll down the main street, visiting the inevitable market. Many people here chew betel leaves and nuts. Our guide took us to a betel stall.
This color and another color over there, two color.
And lime.
Yeah, and you are right, a lime. So combine together and chewing it. But if you taste yourself, you will understand how strong it is. It burns your mouth. Life
is lived on the street here. Even the blacksmith works in the open. The woodyard stocks everything you need for building a stilt house, or bamboo bundles for your floating home. They even sell banana leaf roof panels. Monks walked down the street with their food collecting bowls. At the end of the street we reboarded our boat to visit the floating houses.
And every house here, they also built by a bench of bamboo underneath.
Beneath each is a bamboo trap like this for storing fish, which are caught in the open season when prices are low and kept till the close season when prices are high. Then we returned to the AmaLotus for a last afternoon's relaxation and packing. The next day we had a 5-hour coach ride through the countryside until we came to the Tonle Lake and our hotel in Siem Reap, the Meridian Angkor, the best spa hotel in Cambodia. After a quick lunch we went to Angkor Thom, meaning Great City. It's surrounded by a moat and the bridge is lined with statues depicting devas and asuras, opposing Hindu deities. Angkor Thom was the last and most enduring city of the Khmer Empire, established in the late 12th century, and covers an area of 9 square kilometres. It was abandoned some time before 1609. In the centre of the city stands the Bayon Temple, which was the royal temple of King Jayavarman VII, who reigned from 1181 to 1218. The temple continued to have extensions and additions after his death. The walls are richly carved, but the most striking feature is the carvings of faces on each side of every tower. They're thought to be a likeness of Jayavarman, and there are roughly 200 in the temple. Nearby is the Elephant Wall. This has elephants carved in relief and also on the sides of the stairways. From the top of the wall there are views of other temples in the complex. We returned to the hotel, which was being prepared for Christmas. Angkor Wat, the largest religious complex in the world, is a magical sight at dawn. We joined the hundreds of people waiting to see the sun rise behind this magnificent building, with the lotus pond in the foreground. Stairs lead to the first of 3 levels. The walls at this level are covered with intricate relief carvings. Those at hand level have been polished to a high shine. The main temple is surrounded by lawns, ponds and trees. Inside the first level was a pool that is now drained. The complex was built in the early 12th century as a Hindu temple dedicated to the god Vishnu, so many of the carvings are typical of those found in temples in India. There are grassy courtyards surrounding the second level, overlooked by massive towers. In the late 13th century, the temple gradually moved from Hindu to Buddhist use, which continues to the present day. The third level is approached by a very steep staircase. To go up, you must have your shoulders and knees covered, but your head bare. I went alone, armed with only the still camera. It's a long way down. Angkor Wat is unusual among the Angkor temples in that, although it was somewhat neglected after the 16th century, it was never completely abandoned, its preservation being due in part to the fact that its moat also provided some protection from encroachment by the jungle. In the centre of the third level is another courtyard. In the distance you could see the tethered balloon used for sightseeing over the complex. There are more carvings and statues, though some of the towers are showing signs of needing attention. Back on the second level, a group of Apsara dancers were posing for photographs. We returned on the long avenue, past the lotus pond, over the moat and back to the hotel for breakfast. The Orphans and Disadvantaged Association was established to aid underprivileged children. We were greeted there by its founder, Leng. The children gave us the best display of local dancing we saw all holiday and really seemed to enjoy themselves. The children are taught English, art and computing skills, as well as going to ordinary school. The project is funded by the sale of their paintings, and visitors leave small items such as soap, pens and notebooks. The children are very proud to escort visitors around their home, and showing us their kitchens and bedrooms, as well as their pets. All have lost at least one parent, and some were born HIV positive, like little Sunshine here. They're truly happy children, and have greater opportunity here than many kids with families. A short ride away is the entrance to Ta Prohm, which is approached by walking down a sandy track, alive to the sound of cicadas, then crossing over a moat full of mangroves. Unlike most Angkorian temples, Ta Prohm has been left in almost the same condition as it was found. The jungle has encroached on the walls, and doorways are partly collapsed. As we got further into the complex, we found that trees had grown over, around, and even through the temple buildings. So atmospheric is the site that it was used as the location for the film Tomb Raider. Built in 1186, the site was home to more than 12,500 people, 18 high priests and 615 dancers. It's still a significant site to Buddhists to this day. Next morning, tuk-tuks were waiting outside our bedroom window ready to take us on the final trip of the holiday. Heading back to the Angkor complex, we rode over the causeway to Angkor Thom. Here we saw what was to be our final mode of transport, elephants. From the platform it was a difficult climb onto the howdah on the elephant's back. Now it was our turn. We set off on a rather bouncy circular route around the Bayon Temple. It was interesting to see it from a different angle. It was very difficult to film from a moving elephant, so every now and again we stopped for a picture. We returned to the mounting platform at the end of the ride. Then back to the tuk-tuk, over the causeway, through the jungle and back to the hotel. We spent some time wandering round the hotel grounds. We spent the last few hours at the pool. After all, what else would you do at the best spa in the country?